Thank you, Kelly. That was awesome. And thank you for inviting me here to speak. I guess I can start off with agreeing with Socrates, probably the smartest man in the world. He went to the Delphic Oracle. Once word got back, the Delphic Oracle had told somebody he was the smartest man in the world. And he said, I don't get it. Surely this can't be. I can't be the smartest guy in the world. And the Delphic Oracle said, you are. He said that I don't know everything. I'm not sure I know anything. And the Delphic Oracle's reply was, that's why you're the smartest man in the world. You know that you don't know. Which is one of the things that's been a real joy is teaching the superhero class at University of North Texas. I kind of fell into it by accident. I actually did my dissertation on charisma and charismatic leadership, but charisma literally from the Greek, which means divine gifts. So it's not much of a leap to see where having superpowers ties in with having some kind of divine gifts. But one of the things that you've asked me to think about today, one of the things that superheroes are great for, is thinking about ethics. And so, why does Superman matter? I think Superman matters quite a bit. As a matter of fact, that's one of the points of the course, is it allows an opportunity for students to, well, not just read comic books, which is also great, but to reflect on what we can learn from superheroes. So I guess I can start by thinking a little bit about why ethics, and even why superheroes. Because that's usually the first response I get when I tell somebody I'm teaching a class on superheroes. It's either, wow, that's awesome, what comics are you reading? And then the second response is, what? Really? Why? And why ethics? I mean, that's a good question. So if you'll bear with me, I'll just kind of run through some of my song and dance that I usually use with some of my students to get them to think a little bit about it. And I start off with the difference between morality and ethics. Because even as children know, we don't really have to study ethics, right? I mean, we kind of are raised up in a certain system of beliefs, and this is usually what we call morality. And these systems, right, tell us what to do, what not to do. We also know that we can get away with some stuff, right? And if you've ever been in Walmart and you see kids fall down on the floor, pitch a fit, right? They get what they want. Now, I don't know about you, but that's really smart. Kids are smart. Because if I knew I could walk into Walmart, throw myself down on the floor and pitch a fit and get a car stereo, I'd do it every day. But even that game plays itself out, right? As a matter of fact, when we think about this, Aristotle had something interesting to say about ethics. He thought that young people were entirely uninterested in it, whereas old fogies were usually concerned about it. Now, why is that? Well, for those of you here getting up on years, like myself, you have a lot less room to mess up. And that does make you tend to reflect on what works, what doesn't, what's good, and what's not. One of the other distinctions I like to think about is, again, this idea of ethics versus morality, is that morality, because it's based in systems, right, usually contains rules, right, or commandments. This is one of my favorite games that I play with my students, because I'm like, yeah, well, 10 Commandments, what's the first one? They usually struggle a little bit. Come on, it's number uno.
Oh, you're asking? I'm Lord God, thou shalt have no other God before me.
No other gods before me. That's right. Thank you. That's it, right? The kill one's awesome, though. But no other gods before me, right? Which is interesting because what this is getting at is idolatry, false idols, right? Which makes me think of my Granny Treat's house. She's actually got a picture of Jesus up over her dinner table. And he's got, hands in prayer like this. He's got blue eyes, very fair complected, brown hair, blonde highlights. I call him Wonder Bread Jesus. One of the interesting things about Wonder Bread Jesus is when I went off to college, because I grew up in Arkansas, when I went off to college, I actually met some people from the Middle East, and they did not look at all like Wonder Bread Jesus. Now, when we think back on that, and now I kind of get, right, why in the Muslim tradition, they get upset if anybody makes a depiction of Muhammad. Why? Because they're worried about this problem of representation, right? These graven images, et cetera, that you forget the idea, forget the principles, right? And you focus too much on the thing, right, that represents it. Which brings me back to superheroes. This is the reason I think that superheroes are easier for us to kind of meditate on right and wrong, and the reason is because we know they're not real. And so it allows us to look more closely at what they do, why they do things, and it gives us more license to then reflect, which is what ethics is about. Rather than being based upon a system, it's a process. And this is one of the things I have to get my students over immediately. So look, if you're coming in to a discussion of ethics and you're looking for answers, you're not going to find them. You're going to find lots of questions. Ethics is hard because it makes you stop. It makes you have to think. It makes your hair hurt, quite honestly. Because you start looking at all the possibilities. You start thinking about, well, what about this? What about short-term consequences versus long-term consequences? Is it good for me now? What will happen later? What about unintended consequences? What kinds of possibilities can I see? What other choices are available? See, and this is where the students' eyes glaze, right? And they're like, see, that's why those 10 commandments, those rules, and even in the textbooks, they usually have ethics checklists, which are ridiculous. Right? Because what do you do with a checklist? You blow right through it. Sure, check. None. But ethics is about reflection. It's about getting us to ask questions, hard questions. It's about reflection, and it's also dialogue with others. And so it's not just a dialogue with ourselves, what values we have, what kind of actions we partake in, but also with others as reality check. So this brings us back to the idea that Socrates put forward, is the difference between belief and knowledge, right? This is another one of my favorite tricks is, how many of you in here know the world is round? No, for a fact. You know the world is round. My God, Thomas is in here. The world is round, yeah? Well, is it something you believe or is it something you know? That is, knowledge is something that you can test, something you can prove. Or is it something that we believe through convention because we've heard it plenty of times, right? This difference between knowing versus belief, mere belief, this is where we can get hung up sometimes, I think, with what we actually know. Have we tested it? And again, this is a good reason that I think superheroes, because we don't get as hung up on our beliefs about what happened, what didn't. We know that they're fake, we know that they're fictional. It allows us to test what we know. And also then reflect upon virtue and faith. Because virtue really is this kind of faith in something that we act in accordance with. So, one of the things we discover when we look at superheroes is that this Passion of the Christ, or also the problems of Gandhi, of Mother Teresa, even the Buddha, they have a serious Clark Kent problem. That is, how best do I use my gifts? Right? And how can I be sure that I'm doing good? And these are important questions, and these are the key ethical questions, because the answer is, we can't be sure. If you're looking for certainty, it's very rare. But we still have to act. We still engage in this process of examining our beliefs, testing our knowledge, and also choosing to act in faith, to believe in something. Now, just as too much or too little faith can be a dangerous thing, so too can too much certainty. One of the things that Superman, when we think about him, is what makes him super, right? Now, obviously, we heard this story. We know he has superpowers, right? That's kind of the first place you go, right? But, there are lots of other characters with superpowers. And even you have people like, Tony Stark, Batman, Iron Man, right? They don't really have superpowers. They're just rich. They have incredible technology that they can afford, right? I mean, when wealth is a superpower, you know where we're at. So, no, it's not really superpowers. Well, is it the secret identity thing? I mean, is it because he's an alien, because he's from another planet? Is that what makes him super? Well, no, not really. I mean, they run into aliens in the comics all the time. It's his mission, right? It's this idea that we like to think of it as being selfless, right? He's some kind of selfless servant, right? He does things. He's benevolent. But I would posit that actually he's very self-aware. That is, he's incredibly self-aware about who he is and why he's doing things. And it's not just why, but how he does it.